graphically, through implication of text, through the narrative, whatever the case might be, whether it's direct as you see something, or it is indirect as in you feel something or hear something, or you are given the impression of a specific gender or a specific sex in a game. That happens at times. When you turn on Tomb Raider, it's impossible to not know, because of the third-person perspective, that Lara Croft is indeed a woman. Lara Croft might defy certain gender roles, which is what I was really trying to ask about this week. Is it okay to occupy a specific gender role in Lara Croft? But, in other words, the game and the designers of the game vicariously provide you with the information that she is definitely a woman, and she definitely has certain traits and characteristics of a woman, even if she defies certain gender stereotypes or fights against some of the cultural gender constructions around her sex, as it were. So that's one scenario. What about another scenario? A scenario in which you embody a particular character in perhaps an avatarial relationship, but you don't have any kind of visual clues as to what that character is in terms of sex. Now, here you have to kind of infer certain kinds of gender, but I think Nightwolf's point is that, at that point it is not overt. It becomes something that's more constructed from you. That scenario is what I'm really interested in. So I get completely what Nightwolf's saying. I want to laser focus in on the fact that if it doesn't give you any visual cues, and if it doesn't give you a lot of gender clues, what do you do then? And I'm going to formulate my own hypothesis about that later on in the show. Anyway, cool comment. I like that. Marquis talked about occupying gender is a necessity, and that disconnection from it is alienating. I think this is a great point, and I think it's I threw the term alienating in there. I used that as that was not Marquis' term. I put that in there to kind of summarize the argument, by the way, but I think it's a good one. Marquis' point is that we occupy gender as a matter of course. As a matter of fact, as soon as we turn on any game, we are occupying a specific gender, regardless of whether we want to or not consciously. Interesting thought, huh? This is closer to the thought of what I was really asking about for this week's Wringer. But I love the next step. Disconnecting from a gender role is alienating. This is an interesting thought. Now, forget sex for a second. Let's talk about a gender role. So, if you disconnect from a gender role, from a gender inside of a video game, as in, you're playing Minecraft. You never push the button that zooms out and shows it a third-person perspective. You just get born into a world that is first person and you can see around. What kind of clues would you have about the gender of this particular being? Would it be, their capability to punch a tree and tear it down? Is that a more masculine thing to do? Would it be the capability to, farm and produce and provide, which could be construed in many different ways, both from a masculine and feminine point of view? I think in that case, right, there's really not a lot of clues there. There really aren't a lot of indicators that would help you understand or discern that. Doesn't mean you don't create it. What I think it means is that if you were to somehow flip the switch in your mind that could turn off your gender association with the main character in Minecraft, I think it would be very alienating, very foreign, and I think it would also be what we call uncanny. It resembles real life, but it only does it in such a way that it kind of is hideously ugly and weird because it's not the same at all. It's different, it's strange, it's crazy, and it makes us kind of distance ourselves from it. That, I think, is a great point, and I think Marquis kind of starts the work of how we get there, and I think that's an awesome comment, and one that I think I could continue to unpack for the rest of my time in the show. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to move on to other comments. Vulcan Assassin talked about certain games lose part of their effect. Now we'll talk about what effect means in a second. When gender is reversed or challenged or, thrown up against cultural norms, whatever you might want to say. I think this is a great comment. Now certain games lose part of their effect. Now, what are the effects of games? What does that mean? Does that mean that you have less fun in a game when gender is reversed? If you walked into a fighting game and the women were strong and brutes, kind of like strong brutes, and the men were quick, kind of weaker but fast characters that could kind of land blows quicker, that's just a fighting game, right? Does that make the game less fun? Does it make the game less immersive? Does it make the game less interesting as a gamer or as someone watching or observing games? That is a critical question. Now, I don't know what necessarily the effect of games might be, but whatever a designer is doing as a designed effect, and I think generally that tends to be fun. People want you to have fun when you play a game. I think it's very possible that if you mess the gender roles up, if you change things, you move things around, you try to create your own rules, or you tie them firmly to sex, for example. In other words, if you make them a little unrealistic, a little too unrealistic, I think then what ends up happening is games can lose their effect. And I think that's a good point. I'm not sure that they become unplayable or not at all fun, but I do think they probably lose some element of their effect. So I agree with Vulcan Assassin there. Mr. K made a great designation here that I think is worth repeating, and that is utility versus functionality. He's using this as a way to really summarize, I think, a lot of the arguments that have been made. Utility being a certain specific capability or series of capabilities inside of a game that make a character more capable, that have utility in the game, right? So, if I can use a character with longer legs, I'm going to do that. If that character is a woman versus a man, I might be less interested in that because the utility is better to have longer legs. I can hit someone with them, right? There is a discernible utility advantage in the game to embodying a particular character. That is one thing, okay? Versus functionality, which is more along the lines of what, I'm not sure I agree with the terminology with functionality, but I'll just go with it for a minute to talk about, I think this is more along the lines of what several of you were talking about in terms of the function of the story, the function of how the characters fit into a narrative that is somehow compelling to you. That, I think, those are two different things, right? One is about really gaming the system to have a competitive advantage. One is about fitting into a narrative or fitting into a universe that's been created for you by embodying a specific gender characteristic or series of gender characteristics. This is, I think, the best way to think about the division of how sex. And then conversely, also, I think there are pieces of how gender gets created in video games and how it gets divided along a singular line, a singular divide, if you will. The utility versus functionality, I think, is a great way to think about it. So I thought that was a very insightful comment. Physics of video games mentioned two things that I want to highlight. This was, I thought, this was a very, very well thought out series of comments. If you haven't read this yet, you totally need to read the whole thing. Number one, Metroid. So think about Metroid as a gender reversal, not a sex reversal now. Now there is a bit of sex reversal if you were just watching and thinking you were playing as a man, and then you wind up playing. You wind up finding that Samus Aran is actually a female. Excuse me. That is a sex reversal. However, physics of video games instead breaks down the very fact that because Samus embodies a different kind of gender role, as in, yes, it is a woman, whether you know that or not, but she embodies specific gender, more masculine gender traits. That is why it becomes interesting. It's less interesting that, you know, you have a woman there who is in a bikini underneath the suit. It's more interesting that a woman inside the suit can do all of these things that you were more than likely associating with a man when you began the game. Whether you read the booklet that was associated with the game or not. She blows things up. She's got missiles coming out of her arms, right? I mean, these are not things that generally get reserved for female characters or for feminine characters, to put it in gender terms. As a result, what we end up doing, I think, we find it interesting because Samus kind of defies those. She is something different, and every game that you play as Samus from that point forward is probably a little bit different, knowing the fact that Samus is a female sex, kind of embodying certain attitudes or, at the very least, social constructions of what it means to be male, even though she is, in fact, a female. So it's an interesting point, one that I think is absolutely spot on. I agree with it 100%. Number two, this is the other point that was made. Gender constructions. So the way that gender constructions get depicted inside of a game, right? Again, not sex, not the way that they overtly show you a part of the female anatomy so you know what a character is in terms of sex, but gender constructions make characters more believable. They make characters more inhabitable. They make characters more immersive, which I think is the point that the physics of video games is making. I think this absolutely speaks to the heart of why I was asking the question. When you fit into a particular universe, you fit in because of its ability to capture those attributes of masculinity or femininity and the realistic embodiment of those attitudes and those attributes of masculinity and femininity. Take something as simple as Mario Brothers, where you have, where you are given, I think, overtly the little pixel, you know, here's Mario jumping across the screen. This is a man, right? Or at the very least, it is a male sex. But the whole point of the game is that Mario is doing superhuman kind of stuff. Eating mushrooms, jumping on things, risking his life, dying frequently in order to save his girlfriend. I think it's necessarily a girlfriend, but the princess, okay? So the princess is in another castle. Mario is there to save her. Whether or not she is a romantic interest probably is less important. The important part is the princess has been taken. Mario's sole motivation in working in this entire game is to save the princess. That is a construction of gender, not of sex. It makes the character more endearing. It makes the character more believable, and I think it adds to the effect of the game. We just talked about that. But it also makes the game more immersive and more fun to play. If you're sitting there and you're just a character that's jumping across stuff to do things, that's fun. How many platformers came out for the NES and the SNES? Or Genesis, right? Really any of that generation of video games. More than you could possibly shake a stick at. How many of them are really compelling? And forget, and I know many of them are not compelling because they're virtually uncontrollable and terrible games. But one of the reasons they're not good games is because they don't give you that kind of premise. No one thought about where this person came from. No one thought about where, that this person has an existence, has a gender, has a backstory that makes them compelling. And I think whether you think about it or not, when you learn that Mario is going to save a princess, the game becomes more compelling. Whether you're a female gamer a male gamer, so that's sex, or whether you occupy